It's time for another Dice Tower review with Z. Garcia.
Hey everybody, Z Garcia here. Today I'm taking a look at Arkham Horror, the card game. This one is a living card game set, of course, in the Lovecraft Mythos, and in it, you and possibly another player, it's one or two players out of the box, are going to be cooperating, investigating some strange happenings in the city of Arkham. The game is, of course, a card-driven game, but it's also a story-driven game, and the story is a big part of what's going on here. Let me give you a quick overview of how the game operates. I'm going to be focusing on the Solitaire version of the game, and then we'll come on back and I'll tell you what I thought of it. So here's everything that comes in the game except for a few more tokens and some books here. You have a Learn to Play guide, you have a rules reference, as well as a campaign guide. And so yes, the game is campaign driven. You have one campaign in the box, and you are going to be going through 3 scenarios, basically 3 parts, to complete this campaign. And depending on how well you do on each of those, it dictates how you start the next leg, what you start with, etc. Okay? And as I said, all of this, I'm going to push the tokens aside for now, and we will not be needing all of these cards for our demo here. The game is largely story-driven, and you are trying to investigate and do the best you can to find out what's going on in Arkham. There's been some mysterious happenings and goings-on in town, and you are trying to decipher what is happening. So, to set up the game, you have your character, you have some resources on your character there. This is your own deck, and you draw a hand of cards. You place a location, as indicated in the guide. You begin in your study. This card here indicates where you are, so I place it there next to my study. The study has some clue tokens on it, and up here we have the cards that tell you the story and further the game as well. They tell you in much nicer writing that you are sitting in your study, you are investigating what is happening, and suddenly you hear scraping coming from underneath your feet, underneath the house. And you get up to investigate, and suddenly the door to your study vanishes from view, and you're off. So, that's what these tell you, and these, as they become filled with tokens, will be flipped over, you read the back, and then the next card is revealed, and will tell you what is happening, okay? This deck up here, by the way, is the Baddies deck, some bad stuff that's going to happen to you, and some cards that have been set aside. So, how does the game operate? Each game is broken down into rounds, and each round has 4 phases. The first phase is the Mythos phase, and I'll come back to this one because you skip it during the first round. Second is investigation. During the investigation phase, each player is going to take 3 actions, and those actions are as follows. You can draw a card. You can give yourself a resource. You can activate an ability on a card. You can move from one location to another location if they are connected, and a symbol on the card would tell you if they are connected. You can investigate your location, which means you are going to try to pass a test to gather one of these clues. You are going to fight or engage an enemy if there are enemies where you are or at another location. Or you can attempt to evade an enemy and run away if you don't want to fight that enemy. There's also other abilities you can activate that would not cost you one of those 3 action points. Okay? So that's basically what you are doing. And so this turn, for example, I could play a card, which I think I forgot to mention actually in the overview is very important. You definitely can play a card as one of your actions. So for example, let's say I'm going to play this guard dog. I play the guard dog. It tells me up here what my cost is, so I pay 3 of these resources. That is 1 action. For my second action, I am going to draw a card, let's say, and for my third action, I am going to investigate. So here's how investigate works. You have some tokens that I have put in this bag here. The bag does not come with the game. It just tells you to put them in a cup or something opaque. But you have a handful of tokens here. And those are all in some container. You are going to, in order to investigate, I'm going to use my lore, my knowledge, which is a value of 3 on this character. I can then add any of those tokens from any abilities I have, or I could even discard cards from my hand for symbols down the side here, which I can add on to that. So, for example, I could discard this card, which happens to have one of those symbols, to add 1. So my total right now is 3, and that one is 4. The shroud symbol here lets me know how difficult it is to find something at this location. And so my total is 4. I'm trying to match a 2. And so I would go in here and I would draw a token and I see what I get. This is a special symbol that I would check this card for. Let's say I draw instead a number. Let's see if it's a number. It is. It's a 0. So great. My 4 is not modified. I beat it. I would get one of these. Sometimes, however, you are going to get all sorts of bad stuff, like a, let's see, we have a -1 here. We have another fun symbol here, which is not going to be good. There's a -3 right there. And there is, of course, this wonderful token, which means you lose. It's an automatic fail, no matter what your value is. Haha. So, that is what you are doing. And a lot of the tests in the game are going to go that way. Fighting's going to go that way. Any sort of challenge you have to overcome is typically going to go that way. It's just the value that you're using, your speed or your intelligence or how strong you are, that's what's going to be different. And the cards you can use towards that, of course. So I did that, and that was my 3 actions. Next phase is the enemy phase, in which every enemy that is engaged with you is going to attack you, and some of them are going to look for you. So obviously right now that would not apply. And then lastly, you just have the upkeep phase where you reset your card. After you take your actions, you would flip it to mark that you are done. Obviously in a 1-player game that doesn't really matter, so I just never flip it over. I just leave it alone. You would ready all your exhausted cards, and then you would draw a card and 1 more resource. And you would then check your hand size, that's it. And then we loop back around to the Mythos phase, the first phase we skipped. During this one, you are going to add 1 Doom token to the card up here. You would check if the number is matched. So once this has 3 Doom tokens, boom, it triggers, we read it, flip it over, read it, and we go to the next card, okay? And then finally, we take a card from here, and we see what we have to deal with. In this case, it is, I've found some rotting remains. Ugh. And it is a test. It's forcing me to pass a test. And for each point I fail, I would take 1 horror. 1 horror would be 1 point of damage to the mental damage of my character. And so that's basically it. I would, again, test these by using my value, any card I want to add to that, and the tokens from the bag here. If once that's done, I set it aside, and I take my actions again. We go to the enemy phase again, upkeep, and that keeps happening as we work our way through these cards with these Doom tokens, and through these cards with typically these clue tokens, okay? That's how it works. You want to go through these before you go through a bunch of these is the basic idea here. Continue doing that. Trying to discover everything, reading your story as it's happening. Once we move out of here, then we are going to set out some new locations. So sometimes you'll have a bunch of locations like this, and as you discover them for the first time, they are going to be flipped over and they tell you what happened, the shroud, how many clue tokens are there, etc. The story will be further along, some new characters are going to come into play, all of that stuff is happening. But that's pretty much the overall idea. Investigate, chip away at the tokens, trying to put the whole thing together and come out on top. That, I think, should give you a pretty good idea of how the game operates. So, let's go back up top, and I'll give you some final thoughts about Arkham Horror, the card game. The game that this most reminds me of course, is the Lord of the Rings Living card game, which was also cooperative and could also be played by a single player. This one, however, I think is a superior game to that. I like this theme more, for one thing, but besides that, I think the game's mechanisms are a little bit tighter, they've been cleaned up, and I think the story-driven elements do go a long way towards making this a more engaging product. It's more fun, I think, to solo this game. You are going to enjoy the story, you are going to get into what's happening. Now, a lot of that is going to go away after the first time you play. And you can keep on playing that scenario that comes in the box, but of course, you'll have a lot fewer surprises later on. Once you see this stuff for the first time, you can still enjoy it, and I do still enjoy it. But of course, that original, flip of the card surprise is gonna be gone. I guess my main complaint about the product here is that it needs expansions almost immediately, and that's sort of par for the course with these living card games, but it's very apparent in this one. You can do some deck building, and if you get into that, you are going to extend the life of the product right away for sure. But if you go with the recommended deck, you play through that scenario, you can finish that in one evening if you want to. And the game takes about, one game, of which there are, let's say, 3, okay? Will take you 45 minutes to an hour to maybe a little more if you happen to take your time or the story draws out. But that's a good length. I like the length there. But you can go through all the content, or really most of it, in one evening. You can then play again with a different character. You can play with different cards. I'm just saying, the expansions, you're going to need them, if you get into the game, or even if you just want to play it a few more times, you're going to need some content. Now, that content is coming, so it's fine, but that's my one thing I wanted to mention that would be a ding on the game. Other than that, I think it's really solid. It's well done, good story, great artwork, well-implemented mechanisms, and again, fairly streamlined for this style of game. I did not have too much of a problem understanding anything, really, and if I had a question about something, I was typically able to go and look that up, in the rule book, the thorough one. So, thumbs up for that. I dig it. I think it's a good product, and if you are someone who enjoys solitaire games, you like co-op games, you like story-driven games, and you like Arkham, any of those, really, I think you're going to be set. I enjoy this a lot. It reminds me a little bit of, besides the Lord of the Rings game, it reminded me a little bit of London Dread, a recent game which also has this feeling of being story-driven, but those elements are fairly minor. In this one, it feels more integral to the experience. So, thumbs up from me. Arkham Horror, the card game. Check this one out.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.